to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Now, the big news this week continues to be the mobilization to pass the Elizabeth Warren student loan interest rate bill. That is to say, S-897, introduced about 10 days ago. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, anti-Wall Street senator, has delivered on that to a significant extent with this measure, which would lower the interest rate on the federal Stafford loans to 0.75%. And the money comes from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is forced to cough up as much as needed, as much as the Secretary of Education determines, to pay for at least a year's worth of federal Stafford loans. If this bill is not passed, the Stafford loan rate will double. It will go up from the current 3.4% to an absolutely exorbitant and usurious 6.8%. And this is obviously to be avoided. And, of course, we want, as we've argued last week, we want Elizabeth Warren to make this for more than 1 year. It should be open-ended. It should not be limited to Stafford loans. It should include Stafford subsidized, Stafford unsubsidized, Perkins loans, plus loans paid for by families, consolidation loans, refinancing of older student loans, and private sector loans. So the door should be open to refinance as much as possible of that $1 trillion in outstanding student loans to get down from the 3.4, 6.8, 8, 10, 12, 15%. The sky's the limit in the private loans. Get that all down to 0.75% and begin, it's a first step, begin to diminish this crushing debt burden on the backs of the younger generation. So, and of course, older people who have gone back for degrees that they need for various professional or other reasons. So this is the big mobilization now. This is what has to happen. In particular, we're looking at key campuses, the campuses that have traditionally been in the lead, right? Ann Arbor, Michigan, Berkeley, California, College Park, Maryland. Where are you? City University of New York, State University of New York, the campuses in the Boston area, or that combination around University of Massachusetts, Amherst College, the rest of them, and you know the drill, the complex around Pittsburgh, the complex around Southern California, and so forth. I myself have contributed to this. It was on KDKA Pittsburgh last Sunday. You can see this all on Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. You can see a very interesting, and hear a very interesting conversation with the local people. One guy calling in saying he was essentially crushed that this news was the best thing he'd heard in a very long time. There's also a program about this done by me on KPFA Pacifica in the San Francisco area. It will be on WBAI New York and other Pacifica affiliates. The task is to get this passed. Now, I'm thinking back to Occupy. In the fall of 2011, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people went out and occupied public parks. And the irony was, in retrospect, that they did this essentially for nothing. They got nothing for it. The best that could be said was what I heard one publicist say, well, we changed the national conversation. Yeah, the national conversation is always changing. It goes from Madonna to Lady Gaga to Honey Boo Boo and to Occupy Wall Street and then back to Lady Gaga. It's always changing. This is not enough. That is a pretty wretched standard to hold oneself to, changing the national conversation. You go out there and say, what is your point? I'm making the point that Wall Street is bad. If you catch Jamie Dimon when he's sloshed in a bar, he'll probably admit that Wall Street is bad. Gordon Gekko agreed that it was all based on greed, right? And then they'd turn to you and say, kid, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? You haven't even laid a glove on us yet. You're telling everybody we're bad. People generally knew we were bad in Wall Street. So the question is to attack the power of finance capital, to attack this illegal, lawless, unconstitutional arrangement of the Federal Reserve, which has gone on now for 100 years. We've had enough of this. This is bad news. It doesn't work. It was billed as preventing depressions. We had the crash of 1929, and now we've had the crash of 2008. And the Federal Reserve is not a factor against these things. It's often the prime mover in them. But we are smarter than Ron Paul and the stupid Paul-tards and pallbearers and libertarians who want to abolish the Fed. Oh, no, no, no. Who's going to pay who's going to make available and finance those student loans at 0.75% or less, I might add, if we don't have the Federal Reserve to do it? If you have no Fed, you're left with the zombie banks, and the zombie banks are going to get you up to 15, 20% at that point. So that is no solution. Now, in terms of the progress of the bill, S-897 has a co-sponsor in the Senate. It is Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. Hats off to Jeff Merkley of Oregon. So now we got two senators for this bill, and we're wondering about Chucky Schumer. We're wondering about Durbin. We're wondering about Leahy. We're wondering about Bernie Sanders. Where are you? Can't you come out, Bernie? How about Harkin? Where's Harkin on this? We need all the positive senators, or potentially, to come out and be counted. And if not, we're watching carefully. And if people don't deliver, then there will be a terrible price to be paid. Because this is basically saying, I'm refusing to support a bill that will save the average family thousands and thousands of dollars. It's much better than most of the tax cuts that have been discussed in recent years by anybody. There is also a co-sponsor in the House. Congressman John Tierney of Lowell, Mass. has proposed, and we're checking to make sure it's the identical text with the money coming from the Federal Reserve discount window, but we want that money to come from the Federal Reserve, and we want the rate at 0.75%. Congressman Tierney wrote an article in the Lowell, Massachusetts Sun, the old burned-out mill town on the Merrimack River, right? Lowell, up a little bit northwest of Boston, the Lowell Sun. So that's Tierney. So we got Merkley on the Senate side, Tierney on the House side. The petition for the Warren bill, S-897, has passed 250,000 on MoveOn.org, but this is the White House website. It's the White House website accessed through MoveOn.org, and that means it has more than surpassed the 100,000 signatures necessary to elicit a formal answer from Obama. And can you guess what the answer will be? The answer will be no, unless the bureaucratic pressure becomes enormous and the political pressure. So that is what we are hoping for. But again, it will never come to a vote, and the answer from Obama will clearly be no, unless somebody does things about this, right? And that means if you occupied a square or a building at your college or university for Occupy, why don't you think about doing it now with a programmatic message that would say, we're here, and we're not just here because we're here because we want to lower everybody's student loan interest rate by 90%, at least 90%, if we get to July 1st. So that's the difference. This time you're going to occupy for something, not for nothing. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.
Hi.
to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Everything available on tarpley.net, and a lot of activity in the past couple of weeks on Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. So mobilize now for the Elizabeth Warren student loan reduction bill. Everybody goes down to 0.75%, 0.75%. You heard it right. S897. Merkley on the Senate side, co-sponsoring. Tierney on the House side, sponsoring it there. The petition on We the People White House is 250 to 300,000 signatures by now, well over the 100,000, but that doesn't guarantee you a positive answer. As a matter of fact, the perspective for that is pretty grim. A lot of media blacking it out. Oh, my God. We were looking at the great progressive heroine, Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, and we've got some eagle-eyed watchers looking at Democracy Now! Amy Goodman so far has censored and boycotted and passed over in silence nicks on Elizabeth Warren. That is astounding, but that is an epiphany. It's a revelation of what was going on all the time. It puts Amy Goodman well to the right of MSNBC. Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC had Elizabeth Warren on his show last week. Amy Goodman, where are you on this issue? And then the Washington Post also, very bad. Washington Post, as far as I can see, at least in the printed newspaper, has not said anything about this. Now, the New York Times is saved from the immediate outer darkness by Joseph Stiglitz, and I'm not sure whether this is the printed newspaper or the online, but Stiglitz points out, and this is useful, and it's prestigious for the left liberals, Stiglitz says interest rates on federal Stafford loans were set to double in July to 6.8%, and he thinks there's a possibility of avoiding the worst. But the stay that's currently under discussion, we'll talk about this in a minute, is temporary. The fundamental issue, says Stiglitz, if the Federal Reserve is willing to lend to the banks that caused the crisis at just 0.75%, should it not be willing to lend to students, many of whom, I add, are not bankrupt and never were bankrupt, whereas the zombie banks were all bankrupt, shouldn't it be willing to lend to students who will be crucial to our long-term recovery at an appropriately low rate? The government should not be profiting from our poorest while subsidizing our richest. A proposal by Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, for lower student loan interest rates is a step in the right direction. And I would say to Stiglitz, that's a step in the right direction for you. Now draft a letter with prestigious economists. Send it to Krugman, to Reich, to Galbraith, to all the others. Get that into the hands of Obama and everybody in the House and Senate, and add your voice to this. Other commentaries. Let's see. We have all kinds of commentaries. I told you what it would be, right? Oh, this is awful. It violates David Ricardo. It violates the Austrian school. The Attleboro Sun Chronicle is complaining that it's not the let's see. This is one of these carping things, right? That it violates supply and demand. This is very often the one. The most common among the reactionaries is if you make something cheaper, the demand will increase, and therefore, if you make college cheaper, the demand will increase and the price will go up. I don't know. That's quite a feat. Try arguing that to a room full of strapped parents, dear economic sophists, charlatans, quackademics, and assorted specimens. Let's see some others. Red Alert Politics, Joel Griffith. Same story. Easier loans will increase the demand. They'll raise the price of college. You violate the Austrian school. Here on the Capital blog, the Capital blog takes the indirect apologetic, right? Here we see education is worthless. Students are drunk for 4 years. This is pointless, writes Anthony Sadder. The degree is worthless, and it violates the bony hand of Ayn Rand to try to reduce the interest rate. I would simply say, look at the unemployment rate. The overall unemployment rate is officially almost 8%. For people who went to college, it's half that. And it's true that those wages are falling, but that is the general tendency. The college degree is worth a lot. And again, we have to talk about a workforce for the United States into the middle and end of the 21st century. And you cannot compete with China, Japan, European Union if you don't have more and more, asymptotically, everybody going to college, hopefully in technical engineering and other fields, but college. And certainly the time of maturation, this is all very much to the good. How about Policy Mike? Policy Mike says that Warren is repeating the failed policies that caused the housing bubble. And I'm getting ready here to read. Well, what did she do? Did she dabble in derivatives? Did she issue collateralized debt obligations? Did she issue credit default swaps or synthetic credit derivatives? No. She committed the cardinal sin of minimizing lender risk through taxpayer subsidies designed to keep the rates low. In other words, they're now taking the bankrupt, stupid, discredited, quackademic, reactionary explanation for what caused the Depression, and that usually comes down to poor people buying distressed properties, slum properties using subprime mortgages, and somehow that brought down the world financial system. They're now taking that idiotic argument and trying to apply it to the student loan market. But now let's look at let's look if we can find it at the Yahoo, right? The most fully developed of these critiques, right? Primitive though it is. This is a guy called Delisle, and it is a primitive attack. And I'd like to read you a quote from this. Let me see if I can find it. It's on Yahoo Finance, and let's see. It's going to be hard for me to find it. Maybe we'll get to that at the beginning of the next segment. But a couple of words about this Jason Delisle. He says, Elizabeth Warren is a populist. Essentially, she's a populist demagogue, and she's engaging in a subterfuge. Subterfuge? She's trying to get the mob going. The mob? What? You're simply saying that usury is not good on student loans. Now, here's the argument here, and there's one part of it which I think is relevant. This guy Delisle cites a report from the Congressional Budget Office, and he points out that this report points out the United States government does not, repeat, not make money on college loans, student loans. And I think that's probably true. I would urge Elizabeth Warren to drop that argument. As I said last week, I don't know where she got that. That argument is not clever, and it's now been refuted. Back in a minute. Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. We're reviewing the various scribblings from the Austrian monetarist and some Keynesian scribblers attempting to tear down the Elizabeth Warren proposal. And again, none of these would have any chance of standing up in a public meeting attended by debt-strapped parents, students, families, and so forth. But we can learn perhaps something from some of these writings. One of the things that I tried to point to last week is Elizabeth Warren, even as part of her fact sheet on her website, the Senate website, says the federal government gouges essentially $38 billion out of the student loan market, and I immediately said, I don't think that's right. I want to see the the arithmetic behind that. And what you find is the money that is going to be used for student loans under the Stafford program is going to have to be, to a significant extent, borrowed. Let's, for the sake of argument, say it's all borrowed. It's true, some of it comes from taxation, right? Taxation covers, almost half of it these days. But the other half is going to have to come from borrowing. So what's the federal government borrowing rate? Well, the 10-year note goes for 1.93%, and the 30-year goes for 3.16%. Now, student loans usually go 10 years, and a lot of them go for 30 years, as we're finding out. And we really don't want to go down that road. So the argument about this guy is the following. This is Delisle, once again, in Yahoo. What about Senator Warren's claim that the government makes money off loans to low-income students? Senator Warren is not telling the whole story. She points to figures that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says do not provide a comprehensive measure of what federal credit programs actually cost the government and, by extension, taxpayers. In fact, when the Budget Office accounts more fully for the cost of the risk of the government takes when issuing these loans, it reports that subsidized Stafford loans, that's the 3.4%, those made to low-income students, cost taxpayers $12 for every $100 lent out, or $3.5 billion a year. So if it's, and then, but here's and up to this point, it's true. I think this is probably accurate. In other words, the federal government is not making money on these loans. It's not. Now, again, I don't know where Elizabeth Warren got that stuff, but now here's the flying leap by Delisle. He says, if the loans cost $3.5 billion a year when the government charges 6.8%, cutting the rate to 0.75 would more than triple that cost. No, 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 because this money will not be borrowed. It will not be borrowed at 1.93 for the 10-year or 3.16 for the 30-year. It's not going to be federal taxation or federal borrowing. It's federal lending. It says to the Fed, you are forced, you are obliged, you are coerced, you are ordered to cough up this money at 0.75%. So it costs the federal government nothing. It's just the price of an envelope and a piece of paper. Dear Helicopter Ben, guess what? Starting tomorrow, you will give the Secretary of Education all the money he needs to finance these loans. That is the reality. This is the persistent inability of reactionaries to distinguish between the federal budget, the U.S. Treasury coming from taxation and lending and going out through authorization and appropriation on the one hand, and that cornucopia of cash, the credit-creating power of the Federal Reserve. Now, our dear friend Delisle here says the Federal Reserve is not part of the government, nor is it controlled by it. It is an independent entity. Well, this is double talk. The central part of it, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, is a bunch of people who are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. So these are independent agencies in the same way that there are some others, right? What can we say? I think the Environmental Protection Administration is one. There are certain agencies that have essentially cabinet rank. But to say that it's not part of the government, wait a minute. This Federal Reserve is borrowing money, or essentially issuing money. It's using the inherent credit-creating power of the United States. What has happened is an illegal, unconstitutional operation by Woodrow Wilson, which we now see does not work, to alienate, right, to illegally transfer the credit-creating power of the U.S. federal government into the hands of the Federal Reserve. The answer to this is to bring the Federal Reserve back to what it should be, a bureau of the United States Treasury, the Bank of the United States, the fourth after Hamilton, after Henry Clay, after Daniel Webster's attempt, which failed. This is now the fourth. It will be the fourth Bank of the United States. The bill that we have in front of us does not go that far for the whole Fed, but it says a piece of the discount window is hereby nationalized. So that is the fallacy, and they try to blur the idea of where the money comes from. They say, well, if you do that, you're going to have to borrow money on the open market. That's exactly what you will not have to do. So that, I think, those are the outlines of a critique of Delisle, but also the fact that he's foaming, right, that it's subterfuge and the mob and all that. And what's his answer? Oh, pay as you earn. You can set the percentage of your income between 0 and 10%, and after 10 years, your debt is extinguished. That's great. I'm going to set my interest rate at 1/2. I'm going to be willing to pay 1/2 of 1% of my income, and then after 20 years, it goes away. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So there's some double talk in this, right? He says, oh, there were administrative hurdles. Yeah, I can imagine. You probably have to prove that you're an inmate in debtor's prison. Anyway, I told you to be ready for the full parade of the bankruptcy and the intimate idiocy of so-called economics today. And people are dividing according to morality and intelligence. And the people that are attacking the Elizabeth Warren measure show themselves to be morally and intellectually bankrupt, as well as engaging in complete double talk. Again, their inability to distinguish between on-budget, federal budget, U.S. Treasury, authorized and appropriated, and the other source of money, which is the one we need now for the recovery, and that is the Federal Reserve. If we can tell the Federal Reserve to finance these student loans, we can next tell the Federal Reserve, guess what? You're now going to buy distressed mortgages and allow people to pay them off at 0.75% instead of the current inflated rates, and that will be a great boon to economic recovery. So the proposal now, this fakery going on, right? The fakery is, let's see, the student loan fix is advancing in the House as of yesterday, May 16th. The Republicans want to link the rate to financial markets. This is John Klein, right? Remember, of Education and Workforce on the House side. He says it looks like it's going, he doesn't want it to go to 6.8%. Nobody seems to know what the Republican proposal would produce, but the ranking Democrat, George Miller of California, says this is a bait and switch. Another Democrat says the only thing we can be sure of on the on the Republican side is that you will pay more. The problem here is this article from the Associated Press, May 16th, doesn't say a word about Elizabeth Warren. What's going on here? The whole thing is an attempt to freeze out the one bill that would make a difference. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster G. Tarpley, Washington, D.C., and it's Tarpley.net and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. Therefore, based on all this, I recommend for the friends of the Elizabeth Warren proposal, drop this argument that the federal government makes $38 billion, which would be cut into. Right? Basically, it looks like you're increasing the cost. This is not as effective an argument as they seem to think. Rather, what we should point to is that the Warren bill, to the extent that the money comes from the Federal Reserve, which is where it's coming from, will not cause one dime of federal borrowing. It will not add to the deficit. Hey, red states, it's a proposal to lower the interest rate without adding a dime to the deficit. It does not cost the taxpayers a dime. You're already losing money on this. You're going to get the money from the Federal Reserve. The losses will in any case be diminished, if such there are, and therefore you're also forcing the Federal Reserve to do what you want. Aren't there some good Austrian reactionaries out there who are interested in going along on the basis of finally a concrete coercion of the Federal Reserve to act in the national interest? Ron Paul wanted to audit them. Little Rand wants to audit them. You'll find they're corrupt. We already know it. let's get them to do something that we want, that we demand. So the Republican proposal that's supposedly the fix is that it's going to be market-based. And, everybody now thinks that the interest rate on government securities will go up, 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 and that means your student loan bill will go up, up, up. That is no good. And the Obama proposal is to get it down to a fixed rate of several percent, but it's way above the Elizabeth Warren 0.75. So the point is, hold out for the full original text of Elizabeth Warren S897 that says the Federal Reserve System shall make available to the Secretary of Education all the money that is needed for this. So again, make it more than a year, make it open-ended, make it available for all student loan lending of any kind, and again, all those different sorts, and encourage refinancing. Try to refinance as much of the trillion as possible. And again, Obama better do some things like this. He better do a favor for his base because they're coming for him, right? The reactionary Republicans have got blood in the air. So that's my next point. Let's try to plow through. Obama essentially is destroying his own presidency with this austerity drive. He had the inaugural. He had the State of the Union. He's got nothing proposed on job creation. We need 20 to 30 million, better 30 million plus new jobs, and he's got nothing. He's got a couple of little infrastructure things that don't amount to anything. And instead, he's got the chained consumer price index that will gouge the Social Security benefit and $400 billion more in Medicare gouging. Now, that's a recipe for disaster. What do you think ruined Nixon, right? He came in with a big win over McGovern in 72. Within a couple of years, he was ripe for ouster, and he would have been ousted because what did he do? August 15th, 1971, wage price controls, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. He was imposing austerity, and the American people don't like austerity, and they're right. So let's look at Obama's charm offensive. Obama needs a charm offensive not for reactionary Republican despicable senators. He needs a charm offensive for his own base. Let me tell you what that is right off the bat. The charm offensive Obama needs is no war with Syria, no war with Iran, no attack on North Korea or anybody else. Instead, forget about the chained consumer price index. Forget it. Make it disappear. We never want to hear about that again. And stop the cuts in Medicare and roll them back. Just let that go through the Congress. The Congress will do it more or less automatically, right? Get the doc fix done permanently, right? Restore the $1.1 trillion that you want to cut out of Medicare, Obama. And then we want the Elizabeth Warren student loan bill, 0.75%, and we want the 1% Wall Street sales tax that makes all austerity useless, meaningless, superfluous, more criminal even than it was to begin with. There's a charm offensive, Obama. Have a charm offensive to your own base. Now, instead, he's cavorting with Corker of Tennessee, Saxby Chambliss, remember him? The scoundrel from Georgia. He argued that Max Cleland, with 2 legs and an arm on the battlefield in Vietnam, he was not patriotic because he didn't support Mad Dog Bush the Younger. And Portman. And the debate among the Republicans is how can you better screw over the Democratic Party and Obama? Should you wait a while and see if you can weaken them further, or try to lock in an anti-entitlement, dirty deal, genocidal cuts, austerity ghoul festival right now? Well, this is the wrong direction. These are enemies, Obama. They're going to turn around and vote, in this case, to remove you from office after the House lunatics impeach you. So it's time to cater to your base. This all goes back to the pact. Remember the Clinton-Gingrich dirty deal of 1997, interrupted by the charming Miss Lewinsky. The Republicans went crazy. They wanted to impeach. That's happening now. Good on you reactionaries. on you troglodyte Tea Partyists. And then Clinton had to cling to his New Deal populist base of support, because if they had dumped him, then he would have been out on his ear. So the Republicans are demanding the Keystone Pipeline. I'd give them the Keystone Pipeline. But then this other stuff, abortion, tax reform, no. The deficit is already falling, but that's nothing good. If you don't do anything else, it means you're going to be back to a new recession in 1937. And with the constant process in the stock market of reaching new highs every other day, that's setting you up for some kind of a crash. Now, the Republicans estimate that the debt ceiling will be reached within 4 months. And they are preparing what I've talked to you about before, the labyrinth of constant extortion, that Obama will be extorted every 3 months, every 2 months, every 1 month, every 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. He'll be extorted every day. They'll do one-day extensions in the debt ceiling. And, of course, that will introduce chaos into the U.S. and world economy. But you're dealing with certifiable lunatics. Obama's problems are the ones that we've discussed. We just had the 2013 fiscal summit of the Peter Peterson Institute. You'll remember him. He's the former head of Lehman Brothers, right, the institution that detonated the Depression. But he rejects the idea that derivatives and zombie banks and speculation caused the crash. He says it's the fault of entitlement. He's been harping on that for decades. So at this festival of austerity ghouls, the 2013 fiscal summit of the Peter Peterson Institute, Gene Sperling of the Obama budget team boasts that the Obama proposals will cut $2 trillion out of entitlements between 2013 and 2023 to 2033. In other words, in the second decade out. Now, that means the chained consumer price index will hollow the Social Security benefit to the point where it's essentially worthless. So don't do it, Obama. Now, we have the scandals. We'll talk about Watergate if we have some time. Remember, Watergate was an attempt by the intelligence community to oust Nixon, to be sure, but then to weaken the presidency, and it worked. And the main problem with Watergate was that Nixon had no reason to defend the plumbers. The plumbers were Gordon Liddy of the FBI, James McCord of the CIA, Howard Hunt of the CIA. The articles were written by Bob Woodward, who had been a naval intelligence officer on a floating presidential command post. Why did Nixon feel that he had to defend that? I mean, that's a very good question for Obama. And I have a proposal of all the people Obama should sack to relieve the pressure and to prepare the turn that I've just described. Now, I'm obviously very optimistic, right? I have no idea any of this could happen, but, desperation leads to wonderful things. Like necessity is the mother of invention. So we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. To the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, the Elizabeth Warren mobilization needs to take off, and in most cases we've got about another week or 10 days to make that happen, and I'm urging people to do that, right? Occupy for something instead of occupying for nothing. Certainly occupy your commencement, occupy your own graduation, and turn that into a springboard, an organizing venue for support for the Elizabeth Warren program. Everybody in that crowd is going to be sympathetic, right? About 40% of 25-year-olds in the United States have got student loans on their back. So the sympathy from students and families is going to be enormous. Obviously, you have the usual right-wing equine posteriors who will be against it, right, and they'll be huffy. But you can just brush them aside. Here's the thing. If you need advice, support, materials, anything that can be done, go to tarpley.net and go to the Speakers Bureau page, and there you'll see a contact feature. You can just type in a message, put your email on there, send it to me, and I can then pass it on to the people at United Front Against Austerity. And depending on where you are, I'm sure, quite independent of wherever you are, we can provide various kinds of support for that. And we'd like to be informed. If you are planning to do a leafleting at the graduation, to contact the speaker in advance and suggest that the speaker come out with a strong endorsement of the Warren bill. If you're contacting faculty, economics professors, the president of your institution, the members of the board of trustees, urging that they come out in favor of the Warren bill, right? This is the main problem of higher education in the United States, bar none, at least in terms of the logistics. Let us know about that, right? We want to be information central. So tarpley.net, look on the left-hand side, Speakers Bureau, go to that page, contact box, type in the message, I'll get back to you, or somebody will, and off to the races we go. And I urge you to do that now. And we're looking to the classic flagship campuses, but maybe there are upstarts, right? It's like the March Madness of the NCAA. All right. So we're looking to Obama. If he wants to survive, this is our good advice, friendly advice, and it's absolutely honest. If you want to survive, drop the charm offensive to Corker, Saxby, Chambliss, and Portman, and do a charm offensive for your own base, because otherwise you will be left in the lurch. Now, concerning the latest scandal, first of all, the denial of tax-exempt status to reactionary organizations. If I hear the word conservative again, I'm going to get sick. They are not conservative. They are reactionary. They are proto-fascist. And they're not conservative at all. And these are not people who are being harassed because of their tax returns or reporting to the IRS. They're people who are looking for tax-exempt status. They are rent seekers. They want to be subsidized by the federal government. And they're whining and complaining that the evil federal government is not quick enough in delivering the tax-exempt status to them. These are Tea Party groups, whatever they are, and they want to get 501c4 status. Now, the 501c4 status says that the political activity of these social welfare organizations should be insubstantial. Now, the IRS, it seems to me, in conflict with the meaning of the statute, says insubstantial means less than half, so up to 49.9, but not 50% and not 51%. The obvious thing to do would be to deny just about all of these, and I mean the reactionary ones, the progressive ones. It's a fraud. They are not social welfare operations. They are political pressure groups. They should be denied. Now, there's 527, where you can do the same thing, and you're political, and you're quite frankly political. The difference is the tax-exempt status under the 501c4 also gets you anonymity. You do not have to disclose the contributors. So these reactionaries, right, these Tea Party fanatics come forward and they say, we demand that we want to be subsidized. We don't want to pay taxes on what goes through our operation, and we want to operate in the dark. We don't want you to know if it's coming from Koch or Soros or whoever it is. Well, our heart is not exactly bleeding over this case. Now, we're told, but it's grossly unfair. Well, the groups coming forward in 2010, 2011 would have been overwhelmingly Tea Party anyway, because not so many pro-Obama groups were coming forward there because the bloom was off the rose, so to speak. So the ones coming forward would have been from the Tea Party. Now, the other thing is, you're trying to find groups that are attempting to get 501c4 but are really political. Well, look at the name. Tea Party would seem to suggest not a cafe clutch, but a political organization. And if you call yourself Patriot or 912, Glenn Beck, that would also seem to suggest that's where you might want to look to see if people were trying to abuse this application process. And we're also told that it's not supposed to be devoted to the glorification. I think somewhere in the statute, it's not going to glorify any one person, such as Glenn Beck, the fanatic Mormon supporter of Mitt Romney. So I would suggest denying all of these. That would have been the proper course. Remember, Karl Rove has Crossroads, American Crossroads. That, I believe, is a super PAC. And then he's got Crossroads GPS. That's the 501c4. This is obviously a fraud. And the question that we have is, the people who did all this were Bushmen. They were all Bush appointees. The head of the IRS at the time this was done was a Bush appointee. Does that mean that he was a Bush submarine? Was he a stay-behind operation by Bush? Because you look at how this was done, the groups that were targeted were the smallest. They were fairly numerous, right? 25, 30, I'm sure more, maybe 100. So they target the small groups that don't add up to anything, but they don't target the one that would have mattered, Crossroads GPS of Karl Rove. That one spent $70 million as a 501c4 in the 2012 campaign. So my question is, did low-level or high-level Bush holdovers, submarines, maximize the potential political damage at the same time that they were minimizing the actual practical disruption of the Romney campaign? So let's not get our clothing maladjusted, let's say. Let's not have wardrobe malfunctions over the drama, the pathos of these groups. Now, the other thing, if you saw that press conference hosted by Madame Bachmann at the House of Representatives, right, the wild-eyed prophet from the upper Mississippi, forward comes Sekolo, the lawyer for some of these groups. They want damages. They want to put their hand in the federal treasury, and they want money. So these are rent seekers from two separate points of view. They want to be tax exempt, and of course do it anonymously, so that if the Koch brothers or Soros are giving them money, they can hide that. And then, since it was delayed or denied, they want to come forward and say, "Oh, let's have some money from the federal till because we went through mental anguish." I'm sorry, this is not going to go anywhere. And Obama shows himself what a coward to grovel in front of it instead of making some of the relevant points that I've just made. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. One other thing concerning profiling. Here in this case, it's profiling by keywords, right, by Tea Party, Patriot, 912, and so forth. The Republicans always demand profiling. They say, oh, when we go to the airport, we can't do a lot of frisking of 75-year-old grandmothers in tennis shoes. We got to focus on those young men from the Middle East who are most likely. Well, my gosh, you know, if you had anarchist groups who were out there preaching, the solution of the world's problems through the proper placing of infernal machines, let us say, everybody would say, well, they're talking about it. Maybe they're going to do it. So you're perfectly within the law to go and look at them. Now, when you get to the Tea Party, here are people who say government is evil, taxation is illegal, taxation is wrong, taxation is theft. We urge everybody not to pay their taxes. Well, then maybe you want to look at them and see if they're actually doing that. One lady calling into National Public Radio this morning, I believe, said if you look at some of the officers of some of these groups, you get people connected to We the People, I believe, of Bob Schultz, which is a group that urges individuals not to pay their taxes, sometimes tragic consequences for those involved. So if you're preaching profiling at the airport, then are you surprised if you get profiling from the IRS? Now, let's also remember, Mad Dog Bush the Younger, G.W. Bush, went after the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People big time. So it looks like the pendulum, right? When the Democrats are in, they scrutinize the ones that they find hostile, and the Republicans do the same thing. But in order for that process to have any equity, you have to let it play out from one administration to the other, because you say, now we're going to stop it. And you'd say, well, wait a minute, it didn't stop during the 8 years of Bush. Maybe those 8 years of Bush have got to be balanced. Anyway, I don't care about this. As I say, this whole thing does not strike me as the high-handed outrage of the century. And let's also put it in this kind of perspective. Suppose these groups had gotten their way and Romney had been elected. Let's also remind ourselves of that. If Romney had been elected during the 100 days, and certainly by now, we would be at war in Syria. There's no doubt about it, with Bolton and Kagan and the rest of those neocons, Dan Senior and so forth. We would be at war in Syria. We might also be at war in Iraq, Iran, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. They would have repealed Obamacare, just the benefits, not the taxes. The Republican method is repeal the benefit, repeal the no pre-existing condition, but keep all the taxes. Isn't that something? Voucherized Medicare. We would be well on our way to voucherized Medicare. They give you a voucher. Good luck, you're on your own. You will eat the costs, and they'll get to be more and more. We'd be well on our way to privatizing Social Security, feeding a large portion of the program into the pockets of Wall Street as commissions, the commissions. We would have a national ban on unions. We would have union busting. The Taft-Hartley law would be amended so that nobody can be a union state. Nobody can have a union shop. Nobody can have a union shop. And they don't care about states' rights. They'd say, well, we can't worry about that. We would have a right-to-work law everywhere, and indeed there would be nothing but the open shop. We would have the land of the free and the home of the scabs in that regard, right? Unions would cease to exist. And this is a right that's included in the UN Human Rights Charter and so forth. We would have the franchise restricted. It wouldn't say if you're black or Hispanic you can't vote, but it would be identity checks, no early voting, a million different ways to get around that. And at the top, the potential of fascist judges at the top in the Supreme Court, so that whatever monstrous crime came before them, they would rubber stamp it. A rubber stamp fascist Supreme Court. And, of course, a gerrymander that would go beyond even what we got now, because the Supreme Court would allow that. So that's where you'd be under Romney. You'd be in such bad shape. You can't even imagine how much worse it would be, which is why I brought out that fascinating book, Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. So put it all into focus. That also gets us to the Associated Press scandal. This is much more serious. However, let's also look at it concretely. The way this got going was David Sanger of the New York Times published these articles about Stuxnet, right, the virus used to attack Iran, Operation Olympic Games. This is back in May, June of last year, 2012, around the time of the Bilderberger Group, as we are now, the coming weekend, we got the revelations about Terror Tuesdays, about the proscription lists, right, the death lists that Obama would make up. Then the Republicans went bonkers. The Republicans said, no, we've got to crack down. We've got to do something about these leaks. And that is apparently the impetus to start moving with this. And the question that I would ask, if those wiretaps took place in May, June, July, I guess, of last year, we also have to remember that there was an attempted military coup d'etat in the United States under the color of the November 2012 election. We can't forget this because that network is still there. Some of them have been uprooted. We don't know how many. We know that a whole bunch of generals and admirals, flag officers, and top military industrial people, and top pollsters, and people in the Congress, maybe Senator Mint might want to comment on this, DeMint, sorry, that there was an attempt to stage, and now we're transitioning into the Benghazi question, it was an attempt to stage an October surprise. It came early. It came in September. It was pro-Romney. It was to embarrass and defeat Obama. It came close. If you shift about, 300 to 400,000 votes, we would have had Romney and all the things that I've just mentioned. And that is what these hearings can't seem to deal with. The reason that the hearings are so grotesque and Orwellian and foreign to reality is that nobody is interested in the truth. Again, I would recommend, in the same way that one could have recommended to Nixon in 73, 74, don't defend Gordon Liddy of the FBI, James McCord of the CIA, and Howard Hunt of the CIA. Don't defend them. Dump them. Hang them out to dry. Save yourself. In this case, it's the problem of the Obama administration is that they were dealing with terrorists, right? That the CIA facility in Benghazi, it was a CIA office with the State Department cover, they were there to facilitate the transfer of jihadi fighters, terrorists, killers, and the Gaddafi weapons depots content to Turkey and then into Syria. That's what they're hiding. And then the rest of this stuff descends from that. But I would still recommend go Bulworth. Go Bulworth means tell the truth about this. Admit what you were doing. You can blame it on some other people, perhaps, but clean out that apparatus. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, the Benghazi question arises in this. It essentially suffers from the buildup of all the fabrications, falsifications, mythologies going back 10 years, right? The U.S. government doesn't deal with terrorists. The terrorist sanctuary is this Derna, Tobruk, Benghazi axis, as I had written even in early 2011. And they're shipping those guys into Turkey and then on to Syria. That's what he was there for. That's why he met the Turkish envoy. Now, we've got some Benghazi emails, right? The trivial part of this are these stupid talking points. Who cares about the talking points? Well, the Republicans have a beef because they feel that their dictatorial candidate, Romney, right, the sneering plutocrat who essentially did himself in with his blabbermouth, right, at that meeting that was taped, their beef is that they think he would have won the election if this had been followed up properly. All right, those emails. Now, the important thing to realize is the people you want to watch are General David Petraeus, the head of the CIA, and then General Carter Ham, the head of U.S. AFRICOM in Stuttgart. This is a systematic methodological problem. It goes back to 9/11. If you look at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in 9/11, Griffiths Air Force Base, Rome, New York, what's the chain of command? It goes from Colonel Marr at Griffiths Air Force Base to NORAD, right, to General Larry Arnold and the rest of these people. Whenever you're dealing with military matters, you got to ask yourself, what's the relevant chain of command? If there are CIA people in Benghazi, who orders them around? Petraeus, the head of the CIA. If there are assets that belong to the U.S. AFRICOM, African Command, who controls those? They're under the control of General Carter Ham. So those are the people that ought to be on the hot seat. Now, we have an article, Daily Mail, right, obviously inspired by the points of view of British intelligence, helpfully made available on InfoWars. So the Daily Mail guy says, the 100 emails that have now been revealed show that Petraeus is basically a good guy. Basically, Petraeus objected to the talking points. So, of course, the quibble is, did he object to the talking points because they tended to make the CIA look not as good as he wanted? He wanted talking points that would have gotten the heat off himself and his agency? Or is it the question of high principle that you've got to blame this on terrorists from the word go, right, and embarrass Obama? So it looks like Petraeus is really, in this ramification, he wants to blame it all on the State Department and not the CIA. Now, a commentary on this, which I regard as useful, has been issued by Tommy Vitor, I guess his name is. You can read this. Most of it is not so valuable, and I'm not going to even try to get the exact title. It's an insider's account of the process leading to the formulation of these talking points. And he goes on and he makes these points about the interagency rivalries. CIA wants to dump it on the State Department. The State Department is very angry. They want to dump it back on the CIA. The State Department basically says they know everything. And in the course of this, we see the State Department had security concerns. The FBI was worried about its investigation. Again, the State Department was worried about covering its own posteriors. The FBI was worried about covering its own posteriors. And the CIA had a major yet undisclosed role. Yes, this is as of midweek, after the big hearings last week. The CIA had a major yet still undisclosed role. That's the thing. We want to know the role of the CIA, and we want to know who issued the stand-down orders. Well, my proposal, follow the stand-down orders up the chain of command, and you will find who is responsible, all other things being equal. Okay? So, Petraeus, right? The annex, the CIA annex nearby had 6 to 12 highly trained CIA paramilitaries. They were told not to intervene. That was the stand-down order. Who would have given that order? I say Petraeus. They work for Petraeus. And, of course, he was viewing Argo that night. He's still responsible. Then we have, several times in these hearings, we've got Lieutenant Colonel Gibson is at Tripoli already, in Libya. He's got 6 or so highly trained AFRICOM militaries, in this case, Special Forces, Green Berets. So he's ready to go. There's a Libyan military Hercules C-130 transport plane that's going to fly from Tripoli to Benghazi. He wants to get on. He's told, no, don't go. So who's he working for? Well, the African Joint Special Operations Command works for U.S. AFRICOM, General Carter Ham. If you want to know about the CIA role, Petraeus. You want to know about the military role, you got to call Carter Ham and grill him. Here's another one. These hearings were really stupid. I mean, these things that I'm saying now are so obvious, but they did not emerge at all in the meeting, right? The CIA is commanded by Petraeus, AFRICOM commanded by Carter Ham. Both of them ousted, right? Both of them kicked out. You can read a whole article about this, by the way, on Press TV. That was my opinion piece this week, and you can see it on tarpley.net. What's the closest U.S. military airbase? In the course of these hearings, we're told it's Aviano. Aviano is way up in northern Italy. It's near the Slovenian border in Central Europe. That's not the closest base. The closest base is Sigonella. Sigonella, the hub of the Med, on Sicily, in the shadow of Mount Etna. And that is to say, 875 miles closer to Benghazi, right? The distance from Aviano to Sigonella, 875 miles. And the distance from Sigonella to Benghazi is only 420 some odd miles. So that means the air assets, fighter planes, fighter bombers, could have been there within an hour or two at most. But these hearings are conducted in the dark. And, of course, the hearings don't let you know that such a thing as Sigonella exists. It's famous, right? The famous standoff between the Italians and the U.S. after the Achille Lauro in the mid-1980s. We can go through it all. Look it up. Sigonella. But who controlled Sigonella? It's controlled by General Carter Ham of the U.S. African Command. I was thinking it might have been under Admiral Stavridis, the NATO commander, but no, it's considered part of the African operation. This is where the bombing of Libya occurred. The bombing of Libya was run out of Sigonella massively. So they all know, even these people involved, right, and Hicks, all these other people, they know that Sigonella is the closest base. So these hearings are a sham, and unless you call Petraeus and Carter Ham and recognize the existence of Sigonella, among other things, this is complete garbage. Now, here's the recommendation. Obama, you want to get yourself out of this one. Let's start with Benghazi. The first thing to do is fire Susan Rice, the Viper, right? She has made the United States hated. She's worth several drones just by herself in terms of her ability to generate hate for this country. And that harvest of hate is waiting for us, and we don't want it. Then we have to realize that Obama is planning to make her the head of the National Security Council, replacing the political hack Donilon. Donilon, by the way, is the failed hack who should have coordinated this entire thing for the White House, right? That's his statutory function. Get rid of Susan Rice, get rid of Donilon, and you should also fire Ben Rhodes of the National Security Council. Remember him, involved in failed fake television operations against Syria with his brother at CBS News. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Radio rushing along now. We got to do justice to the Syrian situation here in the time remaining. So, Obama, fire Susan Rice. Forget about putting her in the National Security Council. Get rid of Donilon. He's a failure. Ben Rhodes has failed too many times. Victoria Nuland at the State Department, oh, my Lord, Mrs. PNAC, Mrs. Project for the New American Century. Her husband, Robert Kagan, Brookings Institution, founder of the Project for the New American Century. Top foreign policy handler for McCain, top foreign policy advisor for Romney, the main one. Her father-in-law, Donald Kagan of Yale, neocon, Project for the New American Century. Her brother-in-law, Frederick Kagan, Project for the New American Century. He was the top advisor to General Petraeus. He designed the surge under McChrystal. He continued then as in 2007, he then continued as top advisor to Petraeus in ways that appear to be illegal, that he got himself inside the military chain of command when he has no such ability. Close to Petraeus, therefore, his wife, the sister-in-law of Nuland, Kimberly Kagan, also advisor to Petraeus. She's the head of the Institute for the Study of War. Well, we don't want to study war, no mo. So she's a Kagan. She's not a Hillary loyalist. She's not a feminist working for Hillary. She's a part of the Kagan neocon warmonger clan. So let's open our eyes to some political intelligence. I've never seen such an abysmal low level. So the other thing, IRS, well, the IRS is part of the Treasury. What should we do? Tim Geithner, it happened on his watch. If you think the Tea Party was treated badly, indict Tiny Tim Geithner, the tax cheat. And right now, ministerial responsibility says Jack Lew should be ousted, the city banker with the structured investment vehicles. At the question of the Associated Press, fire Eric Holder, fire Deputy Attorney General Cole. That's what a competent chief executive does, right? You can look at Franklin D. Roosevelt. If officials failed, he would give them the can, right? Raymond Moley and General Hugh Johnson at the beginning of the New Deal, they failed, so they were ousted. Now, Syria. The main reality of Syria, the death squads are losing. The big hurry from Ban Ki-moon and others to get the negotiations going is they're trying to save the rebels from being destroyed. It reminds me of the end of the Tamil Tigers. As soon as it was clear that the Tamil Tigers were going to be destroyed, we had Miliband for the British and Kouchner for the French coming in and say, oh, we've got to have a humanitarian ceasefire. That'll be the next step. So, recent news. The Russians are shipping powerful anti-ship missiles to Syria. It is the Yakontsk missile with, this time, advanced terminal guidance. Senator Corker is freaking out. The Syrians have already got 72 missiles delivered in 2011, 36 batteries, 36 launchers, 72 missiles, 180-mile range. This can sink an aircraft carrier. Corker and Menendez are freaking out. Menendez right back from a tryst in the Caribbean. We have reason to think Russia is backing a bankrupt regime, says he. The other one is Lavrov essentially says we are going to deliver the missiles that were ordered. Pacta sunt servanda. Treaties must be respected. The S-300P may be on its way to Syria right now. We've also got the arrest of a CIA agent, Ryan Fogel, in Moscow. That's very interesting. We are told that the Russian Mediterranean squadron is being beefed up. More Russian warships, some of them based in Tartus. This is obviously a deterrent. The foreign agents, the foreign-funded NGOs in Moscow are getting slammed. Not exactly what the State Department and McFaul wanted. We're also told, and this is a headline, right, the head of the Council of Major Jewish Organizations on the John Batchelor show this past week, headline says, Vladimir Putin kept Skull and Bones Kerry waiting for 3 hours. Ooh, a diplomatic snub. Now, this points up the fatuousness of the predictions coming from various anti-Russian websites, like I believe Boiling Frogs was one of them, that Russia was selling out Syria, that they were making a dirty deal and throwing Syria to the wolves. Doesn't look like that's happening. I wonder if they'd like to revise their position. Poor Erdogan was here in Washington. He's been duped by Obama. He knows it. The Turks used to have zero problems on all their borders. Now, thanks to Obama, they have nothing but problems. National Public Radio admitted today the rebels are not doing well. The Washington Post has had several paragraphs this week. The rebels are not doing well. They're losing ground. Therefore, they got to get to Geneva conference. That's now the rush. That is why Kerry is threatening Syria. You've got to come to the conference. You've got to come. Maybe they should ask for a continuance. He's not, you notice he doesn't seem to threaten the rebels that they have to come, but maybe that's the idea too. Now let's look at our wonderful heroes of democracy. The Syrian rebels. There's one film on the internet where you have 11 people executed, 11 Syrian army soldiers, Class A felony, hanging offense at Nuremberg. Execution then of 3 of them. They're accused of using chemical weapons. They are accused of setting that bomb in southern Turkey. That is being blamed on Nusra as a provocation to try to get Turkey involved in the war. We have the Yarmouk Brigade, which is guilty of kidnapping first a group of 20 Filipino UN peacekeepers on the Golan, and right now a smaller group of Filipino peacekeepers on the Golan, and to cap it all off with poison gas. Cannibalism. We've got the film of a leader of the Farouk Brigade engaging in cannibalism. This is a great tradition there with the Farouks. That is Mustafa Tlass. Look him up in Wikipedia. He supported cannibalism against captured Israelis. He has now switched that over to cannibalism against captured members of the Syrian Arab Army. These people are going to see some action at Nuremberg. I can see it coming. The latest neocon gambit is to try to accredit the hypothesis that Iran has merged with al-Qaeda. It's impossible. It's ridiculous. we had that Canadian railroad plot a couple of weeks ago, and we've now got this guy called Khalili, once again on the John Batchelor show, saying that there are Iranian al-Qaeda cells, Iranian and al-Qaeda, in the United States that are getting ready to attack. And we've got, they pulled along the Egyptian interior minister, accuses al-Qaeda and Iran of wanting to blow up embassies in Cairo, freaking out in the White House because Erdogan and Morsi of Egypt, Erdogan of Turkey and Morsi of Egypt are planning to go to Gaza. So Obama very unhappy with that because that creates more problems for his, at least they're publicly, maybe he's privately not so unhappy, but you get the idea. Bad news for Netanyahu. The general whining coming from the neocons is that Syria has now been put in a position to thwart attacks from the air and attacks from the sea between the S-300P and the Yakonsk anti-ship missile, and, of course, the larger deterrent presence of the Russian Mediterranean squadron. That is getting to look like a dangerous proposition. So it's time to pull back, isn't it? Zbigniew Brzezinski, his former protege Robert Gates from the Carter years, both on record now, no attack. So you've got to be pretty far down the road to insanity to want this. And I guess finally, can't recall whether we treated this last week, but there's a proposal to have a march on Washington, D.C. with armed reactionary goons from outside the District of Columbia on July 4th. Outside agitators, they would have been called. This is to be deplored in every way. The laws of the District of Columbia, even though it's not a state, still deserve plenty of respect. And remember, since the founding of West Virginia, states are no longer sacrosanct. Dennis Miller cavorts with Mark Stein. Mark Stein, obviously British. Mark Stein is calling for serious secessionism led by Texas if the socialism in Washington continues unabated. So that means Rick Perry, the new Jefferson Davis, right? One time as tragedy, and the second time as an obscene farce. I would suggest to Mark Stein that he might want to seriously consider going back where he came from, if that's the best thing he can contribute. Because we've just gone through the Chancellorsville anniversary, and remember, 150 years ago, Grant was tightening the siege of Vicksburg, and the Gettysburg campaign had begun. So we're going to have something to celebrate on July 3rd, the Gettysburg victory, and July 4th, the surrender of Vicksburg. Great days for the United States, and thank God that Abraham Lincoln knew what to do. So we'll be back next week.